It's my Nerd World of Star Wars podcast, and on this week's episode, the good, the bad, and the witches. Acolyte, Episode 3, Destiny, has arrived, and yeah, I have quite a few thoughts to share.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you.
Always.
My Nerd World.
And welcome to it, the Star Wars Show. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. If you are new to my Nerd World of Star Wars show, and if you are enjoying this on YouTube, I hope you will like and subscribe. I think we're still doing that right. Make sure you get updated on all the new videos and podcasts that pop up, or if you're listening to this on via podcast, whatever podcast platform that you happen to have found it on, I hope you will subscribe to that podcast. I'm still really looking forward to the rest of this series. I loved the first two episodes of The Acolyte. I've watched them twice now and was considering watching a third time if it hadn't been for simply life getting in the way and not having enough time to go and watch the episodes again. Heading into this episode, I was cautious about what we were going to see. A lot of individuals had already seen 4 episodes of The Acolyte, but not a lot of spoilers had been leaked. I had an idea of what was going to happen, and there'll be spoilers for the rest of the episode. That the twins of May and Osha were conceived by the Force. Many individuals are online are having problems with that particular aspect of the storytelling. I'm personally not, and I think there's going to be further explanation of this down the line. At least that's what I'm hoping for. But if not, I think there's an in-universe explanation that makes sense relating to the criticism I've heard that this pushes up against the prophecy of Anakin Skywalker. Up front, just based off the timeline and this happening some 100 years prior, this being a Force ability that's been talked about in the past. I mean, Palpatine talked about Darth Plagueis, and he may end up playing a role in this series, having the power to, create life. That's what enticed Anakin to him in the first place. So I wasn't tripped up or bothered by that in any way. I saw clips heading into this episode of the Ascension scene and people complaining about it. I didn't see it in its context at the time, but immediately I was reminded of the Night Sisters using, dark magic in the Clone Wars or even in Ahsoka. This isn't anything necessarily new. I have different thoughts now that I've seen all of the episode. So, I want to share with you what I thought was bad, what I didn't enjoy, and what I thought really worked and why I'm still excited about the Acolyte series. In a word, it was challenging, and that's one of the first notes that I took when I started watching it. The whole concept of the Coven of Witches, it just didn't land for me. Once the Jedi showed up, then the episode really started to cook. then it really started to move. I appreciated the lead-in that we got at the beginning of the episode between Osha and May. Immediately, you begin to see the conflict with these two individuals, which was only expanded upon as the episode continued. May just seems like a bit of a psycho. It may not all be her doing. There may be darker forces at play, and I'll get into some of my speculation of that in just a moment. But immediately, the use of the Force, the way that Osha did in holding that blue, butterfly-esque creature and then letting it go, but May looking like she was actually going to go and crush it, began to lay out the dynamic between these two children that were potentially conceived by the Force or the Thread, as the Coven of Witches go and describe it. I didn't have any problems with that, with the Mother Witch, Anna saying how some people call it the Force, we call it the Thread, and laying out their vision of how one goes and taps into the Force and what you use it for, or the Thread. It's fine. I get it. There are different factions within the universe and different groups that are able to tap into the Force. Again, nothing we haven't seen before. However, everything surrounding the witches just didn't land for me. It didn't have the same positive impact storytelling-wise that, say, the Night Sisters did as portrayed in the Clone Wars, or what we saw of the Night Sisters in Ahsoka. Maybe we'll get more background on the witches. Clearly, they've been ostracized for some reason. Maybe we'll be told of that. I don't know if we're supposed to believe that they're tapping into some dark side forces when the Jedi do show up, and the fact that Mother Anastasia taps into Jedi Torben's mind and has his eyes gloss over, the fact that she's controlling him would kind of lead you to believe that they're tapping into dark side forces, but clearly they've been ostracized for a reason. Here's why, for me personally, the witches, as they were portrayed in this episode, as opposed to other Star Wars content, just didn't work for me, because the rest of the episode worked so well. Once we got back to the core of the story, once we got back to the narrative of the Jedi in this particular era, and the questioning as we as viewers are watching, there's clearly conflict going on here where you're asking yourself, all right, is what the Jedi are doing in seeking out these Force-sensitive children the right thing? Encouraging them to leave their family and go off with them. There was a very Anakin-esque moment when Osha was packing up before May went really psycho and said that she was going to burn her sister alive, for crying out loud. That was reminding me very much of Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace. Now, clearly there's a difference here. Anakin was being freed from the slaves, and his mother was more than happy to see him go off and be with the Jedi. Anakin was making a choice. He certainly could have stayed there on Tatooine with his mother. And there's a parallel there relating to what happened with Osha. Could have stayed with the witches, although she was clearly being drawn to the Jedi, much in the same way that Anakin was. One could raise, an argument that perhaps Osha would have felt a bit of a slave to the Coven of Witches if she had stayed, because she clearly didn't want to be one, to the point where she was willing to break off from her twin sister, and they clearly had a bond together. But because the rest of the episode worked so well, and we were pushing the story along, those first 10 minutes felt more agenda to me than it did good storytelling. It felt like this was something that they wanted to put in, wanted to ride the line of agenda as opposed to storytelling, and it was the agenda pushing the story instead of the story pushing the story. It just felt very heavy-handed. And because of that, it just didn't work for me. I wasn't enjoying it. Now, again, this is subjective. Other individuals may not have had an issue with it. But I was worried in those first 10 minutes of, are we really going to go completely down this road? And am I not going to be enjoying this as much anymore? I just wasn't getting into it. Wasn't buying the characters. It felt forced. The dialogue felt forced. There were a few lines of dialogue that just felt too on the nose, relating to controversies in our modern times. I'm hoping that on a rewatch it won't bother me nearly as much. That being said, once we got past that, and once we actually got past the Ascension part of it, then I enjoyed every minute of it as much as I did the first 2 episodes, even the slower scenes, because it wasn't a matter of pacing. And that's why once the show ended, that particular beginning, those 10 minutes, just felt unnecessary to the story, while the rest of it continued with what I felt was some pretty top-notch storytelling in those first 2 episodes. I hope they got it out of their system. I guess I'll say that. I know for a big portion of the fandom right now, they're done with the show already, and I think that's unfortunate that the rest of the show is being dismissed outright for the sake of certain aspects that people like myself may not enjoy. But this will be an episode that I will absolutely, like the first 2 episodes, go back and rewatch. And as a matter of fact, I may go and watch these first 3 episodes just again in order to experience them in order, because I'm enjoying it that much. But there was a moment at the beginning where I thought, well, the enjoyment of this show went away, and then it immediately redeemed itself once I started caring again because of the arrival of the Jedi. So let's get into a bit of the story. Because once the Jedi showed up, I thought this was a really interesting dynamic. I was asking a lot of questions. Why were the Jedi there in the first place? Are we going to get the backstory on the Coven of Witches and why they are personally fearful of the Jedi? And I know that in the commentary surrounding the show, they've talked a bit about, the showrunner Leslie Headland has talked about, how, what if the Jedi aren't necessarily the good guys in all of this? And this isn't anything new. I know people have been pointing to this online, but when you go back to the prequels, I mean, the whole rise of the Empire speaks to the Jedi failing in what they were supposed to do, failing as an institution. Talking with my son Kyle after the show was over, and he was even mentioning, he's like, there's a flaw in the whole Jedi's thinking with their lack of attachment, which brings about sort of an inability to have relationships with individuals because you're not allowing yourself to get into relationships to know how to deal with individuals on that level. And he made a really, really good point. And I felt that once the Jedi arrived and the conflict began, not just between May and Osha, but also between, again, the Coven of Witches and the Jedi. And this question of whether or not the Jedi are doing the right thing seeking Force-sensitive children. And every time the show sort of leans into that idea that the Jedi are not rightfully using their power and their position in this timeline in the galaxy, you get these really great moments with Sol and Osha, where he's clearly trying to give her the option. Do you want to do this? He is using his Force ability as a Jedi. He knows what's there. But he's still, maybe it's an illusion of her having a choice, but before the Jedi even arrive, you clearly see in Osha that there's a disconnect with what's happening with the Coven, and she doesn't really want to have any part of it, while May is all in on what the witches are, and ascending to become one of them. I thought it was really clever writing and really interesting when they board Sol's ship to test the twins. Now, I'm curious what happened with May. I'll get to that in a moment. But we only see the test being done on Osha. And here you have a callback, although this would be timeline-wise one of the first times we've seen this happen, where they're testing them in the Force by having them say what is projected on the screen for only the Jedi to see. It's the same test that Anakin was given, where what do you see? A cup, a speeder, this kind of thing. And yet the twins are told to lie, which I thought was rather interesting by the witches themselves, which leads me to believe that there's a dark side element to the witches here, if they're trying to tell their children, doing that thing with my fingers, to go and lie. So they fail this test. But I thought it was really interesting the way that Soul ended up testing Osha, in that Osha was lying, and yet Soul was saying that she was getting it right. But that would only mean that Osha knew that he was getting it wrong, because she was clearly seeing something in her mind, in which case she says, you're lying. I'm actually seeing this. It makes me wonder, did he do the same thing with May, or has Soul seen something in May already that made him fearful of joining the Jedi? And therefore, he didn't play the same trick on May. And this brings us to what in the heck really happened to the temple. And this is where I think the show really, really starts to cook, because we're walking away with a lot more questions than we are answers in all of this. So, May clearly has her issues. Doesn't want Osha to leave. Ends up getting her notebook, locks her inside their room, sets the notebook on fire, and then sets the door on fire. Now, I have a question in my mind of what else took place, because it's not just that fire. Something else clearly has happened here, because from the moment the fire got lit, as Osha escapes the room after breaking the wall monitor and going through the portal into another portion of their temple or home or whatever you want to call it, which I thought was a nice little nod to what Osha would become of being that mechanic on the ship after she leaves the Jedi, which we'll get to in a second, because clearly she has a problem with the Jedi at some point in time. But as she's walking through the corridor between the room and whatever space she's going to, there's a massive explosion that takes place. And immediately I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is happening all too quickly for that to have been attached to just the fire that was set. And then we get the broken bridge, the moment between Osha and May, wherein Soul is only able to, what he believes, save Osha. And yet we find out at the very last shot of the episode that May is still alive. So she ended up surviving that fall in some way. But here's the questions that we don't know. Something else clearly happened. You see the witches all dead, but you're not seeing, at least I didn't see, anything to point to that this was because of the fire or the reactor explosion that took place. We also have sort of a movement of characters around this whole time period that don't make sense. You have the moody mother, if you will. She ends up taking May for a walk, and then the next time that we see May, she's threatening to kill Osha. And the moody mother, so this would be the Zabrak witch, not Mother Anasay, which I assume that they're partners in all of this. She may have something to do with what is going on, which may tie into something further relating to the Sith. But clearly, something else ended up killing the witches in all of this. May looks to have gone and blamed the Jedi, but we don't know if the other mother, the moody mother, is even dead yet, since we didn't specifically see her, and we definitely saw Mother Anasay dead. Now, there's a couple of other things that are interesting to this as well. So, something else has occurred to cause this to happen. Because the first thing that I said to Kyle, my son, was, okay, Jedi Torben, he's the one that went into silent mode, okay, and had vowed silence and was doing his forced meditation for the past 10 years. when he finally awakes from that with May, why did he go and commit suicide if the Jedi didn't have anything to do with it? Is there anything at play because Mother Anasay went and got into his mind and perhaps something occurred at that moment in time? It could have just been to show that the witches had Force powers. May did seem pretty scared, though, and a bit confused when they were in that reactor room and she saw Osha. If you were paying close attention, when Osha wakes up and she's with the Jedi, you can see Jedi Corbijn is in the background, and he looks like he's had some damage, like he's gotten into a fight. It's difficult to see, but you can see that he's been injured by something. And in some of the trailer footage that we haven't seen in the show yet, there are scenes of the Wookiee Jedi Kelnaka fighting with not only Jedi Corbijn, but also Jedi Soul, which could mean that perhaps somebody has gone and taken over his mind in all of this. So, to kind of recap, why were the Jedi feeling so guilty about everything that transpired? We've only really seen the events that have taken place in the witch's home, in their temple, from Osha's point of view. The other question that I have is, how does the zipper face helmet Sith guy play in to what's taking place here as well? Because I know we're getting the background of what happened with May and Osha, but that clearly is a central figure to the show. Going back to the Ascension, there was a moment where there were figures that weren't the witches that were up behind Mother Anasay. So I think there's a potential of the Sith could have been involved and manipulating this whole event to get to May, knowing that she would be a good acolyte / apprentice moving forward. And my assumption is that the helmeted figure is actually an apprentice to a larger Jedi figure. He's not the master. He's an apprentice. He's looking for an acolyte to become his apprentice were he to go and take out his master. So here are some of my guesses, though, before we wrap up the show this week. Here are some of my guesses as to potentially why the Jedi are so racked with guilt because of what took place here. And I'm assuming that we're going to get another flashback and see more of the events that have unfolded. So Soul may just feel guilty for causing so much death because they ended up going to the Jedi to the witch temple, their fortress in the first place. Jedi Corbijn taking the bearish vow, he might have done that because maybe he's part of accidentally setting off the explosion and can't deal with it, or just an aspect of this that we haven't seen since. The Wookiee Kelnaka, Jedi Kelnaka, the Wookiee, we know he's exiled from the end of episode 2. So perhaps there's a moment where, because his mind gets controlled and he was unable to help out or ends up coming in conflict with the other Jedi, he feels responsible. And Indara may have something to do with what had taken place that ended up killing Mother Anasay. So clearly there's a lot more going on here. And all of this is to say, again, everything in the episode, once the Jedi showed up and we got back to the core story, was fantastic. Those first 8 to 10 minutes just didn't work. And I don't feel that they worked because it wasn't being true to the story they were telling. They were injecting something else for that time period that wasn't necessary for the rest of the story, which I felt could have been handled better if it didn't seem so heavy-handed. And again, it's all subjective. I'm really glad that the episode turned around, and I'm just as excited as I was after those first 2 episodes. I went into this one very cautious because of the controversies surrounding it. But, I also understand the individuals that are behind making these series, what they are hoping to accomplish, and unfortunately, it's not all going to be spectacular. But this is going to be a circumstance where I personally am not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I can overlook those first 8 minutes, and then enjoy the episode for what it is. But I'd love to hear some of your theories and thoughts of what's happening here and whether or not you're seeing something else in all of this, and maybe I missed something, and perhaps I'll catch something on a second watch. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Let me know what you think, and I will certainly get to those coming up on next week's episode.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, first we'll start with a friend of the show, Edwin, who writes this. I'm enjoying the Acolyte so far. I wanted to ask you, does the short runtime for these episodes in Star Wars bother you? I wish they would be longer episodes like Andor. So far, they haven't been bothering me. I feel like this is simply God bless Edwin. Thank you, Edwin, and God bless you as well. I feel like this is the nature of what we're going to be getting moving forward. This is how the streaming services are capitalizing on views and short attention spans, unfortunately. So it hasn't necessarily been bothering me. I actually thought that it was going into the series, and thankfully it hasn't. So good to hear from you. N. Blackie writes this. Man, you're easy to please. I thought it was abysmal. And this is talking about the first 2 episodes based off of last week's show. The costumes are laughable. The character design is poor. I don't know how you can praise it for its production quality. Nowhere near the Andor level production or storytelling or writing. Andor is miles beyond this in terms of scope. Andor outclasses the Acolyte in every way. And again, this is where I inject my. It's all subjective, and people people enjoy things differently. I agree with you on the production quality, that it is better, that it's not as good as Andor. I think Andor absolutely has the best production quality of all the live-action Star Wars shows. That being said, I'm very sensitive to the production quality, and it's not bothering me at all within the Acolyte. And didn't this episode either. I thought it was better than Ahsoka. And apart from, as I mentioned, those first 10 minutes of this episode, I feel like the writing is solid. So I'm still very much enjoying it. Don't need to go and repeat everything that I said before. So Star Wars Santa. And if you're not checking out Star Wars Santa on YouTube, I would definitely encourage you to go and seek out Star Wars Santa. It's some must viewing. He does some great speculation videos. Was enjoying one thoroughly just the other day. He writes, as for your theory about the zipper helmet face guy being one of the Jedi we've met, my money would be on Yord. I'm looking for the quote from Leslie that you mentioned. I love this theory. Yeah, I'm completely off the Yord theory now, simply because in watching the episodes again, the helmet guy is too close in time to when May goes and meets up with him at the end of episode 1 for it to be Yord. Star Wars Santa goes on to say, in interviews, Manny Jacinto said this about his character. With Quimir, it very much comes from a very selfish standpoint. He's not really about the Jedi, not really about the Sith, but it's more so who he can use to his advantage in order to survive. Star Wars Santa goes on to say, I don't think he's the Sith, the apprentice, or even the Acolyte. So, again, go and check out Star Wars Santa, and I appreciate the comments and the fact that you listen to the show. All right, let's get to Rick. Just listen to your podcast on the Acolyte. Very good. Thanks for the great info. I liked the show, too, and thought the production value was terrific. I was a bit perturbed that Carrie-Anne Moss's Jedi was killed off so soon, but then lots of shows kill off a popular actor early. And I think it's pretty clear we're going to be seeing more of Jedi in Dara. We certainly saw her in this episode, even though she didn't do a ton. And I don't think that I know we're not done with the flashbacks. We're going to see more of what played out in the temple, and certainly her role as well. A couple of nitpicky things bother me a little. When Osha in her quest to search for safety violations, approached the guy who made the poison. It seemed she acted too innocent, and the guy was instantly suspicious, but I guess that's okay. Yeah, I think that was for a reason. The other thing was that when the ship was crashing, she belted herself in a seat with 2 safety straps, and after the crash, she was lying on the floor in a pile of rubbish. Were the safety straps useless? Good point. Also, I too was rooting for her to force grab the robot tool off the floor. Question. Last year, when Disney announced future projects, they announced a movie/show about the early days of the Force and the emergence of the dark side in the Star Wars universe. Is this that project? If so, I was thinking it would be farther back like Prometheus in the Alien series. Anyway, good podcast, and God bless as always, writes a friend of the show, Rick. Yes, this is the show that they were referring to back from before. And thank you, as always, Rick. I appreciate you listening to this show and my radio show. And I'm probably going to butcher this name, but we hear from next Fishara Mac Ioda, and if I said that wrong, I apologize. The production values, sets, and costumes were among the best in Star Wars. Great characters and actors, great fight scenes, love the mystery. Think those Jedi screwed up in the past and covered it up, or at least botched the situation. I'm going with botched the situation. If it continues to improve, it'll give Ahsoka competition as my favorite Star Wars series. So, what do you think? Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Or again, if you happen to be enjoying this on YouTube, I hope that you will leave a comment there as well. And next week, I'll run down my thoughts on episode 4 of Ahsoka. The Acolyte. I've probably done that a bunch this episode. I apologize. It's been a long morning. All right. So until that time, I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, you are safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you again real soon. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.